point of pride for many Canadians is how safe our country has always been, especially in comparison to others around the world. But it doesn't quite feel that way anymore. And soft on crime and lenient bail policies are being targeted as a root cause. But is that really the problem, or is it just the spin? We're going to dig into the data on bail reform. Plus, we have got to talk about the US-Canada trade implosion, all on this episode of the Spin Nation podcast. All right, Emmanuel, here we are. We are on episode 22. Today we're going to talk about bail reform, but before we get into it, it has been quite the week on US-Canada trade relations, and I think we need to start off with that because there's so much going on.
There is a lot going on. Could you believe that Ronald Reagan was actually pro-tariff?
Well, it's just interesting that Ronald Reagan in general is still a part of our political discussions. And for those who are not paying attention to what's been happening, this is as a result of the Ford government's ad campaigns that they ran in the U.S. featuring Ronald Reagan talking about how he is not a fan of tariffs. And this really upset Donald Trump, who then posted on Truth Social canceling the trade negotiations with Canada. Emmanuel, do you think this is real, or is this just more political theater that we're seeing from President Trump?
I think it's the latter. And I think actually Trump welcomes this, right? He always needs some new item to talk about on the Trump show. And Doug Ford's campaign is providing him with the entertainment that he needs to feed the machine. So I think he's actually deep down thankful for this. And my personal take is he's going to tackle out of this particular, no trade negotiation thing within the 10 days or when he needs something else to talk about.
This does seem pretty typical for him. And if you look at all of this in context of Mark Carney doing this surprise address to the nation last week, this was on Wednesday. It was October 21st or 22nd. And out of nowhere, it's announced that Mark Carney is going to address the nation with no lead up. And everyone was curious, okay, what's he going to talk about? And he gave a speech. He highlighted all the things that his government has been doing to try to get our economy in good shape. And then he definitely laid out a key message of there's going to be tough times ahead and this keyword around sacrifices that were going to have to be made. And of course, all the political pundits ran away from that speech, scratching their heads a little bit, like, what was the goal of this communication? And I'm curious your thoughts on this, Emmanuel. Personally, at the time, I thought he was trying to fill the vacuum because the budget is until November 4th, and he just wanted to put something out there and not leave it completely open for others to fill the narrative. But in retrospect, now I'm wondering if, in fact, they knew that there was a stalemate on the negotiations. They anticipated that Trump was going to throw his grenade into it in some form or fashion, and Carney wanted to get out in front of that by laying out what the government's plan is, preparing people for the fact that it's going to be bumpy. That's my guess. What do you think?
I think that makes a lot of sense, Laurel. I want to point out that this is a bit of a pattern with this government. A few months ago, there was a press conference or presentation, and it was about Carney's, 20 points plan for the future of Canada. And that was like last minute, late on a Friday. That's the most terrible time slot for any type of announcement. And it was last minute. Then a few months later, we had the Build Canada Better, the housing plan. And that was done on a Sunday. Again, terrible timing if you're actually trying to get full distribution of your message. Just doesn't make sense at all. Seems to be always last minute. And to your point, perhaps just with the purpose of filling in the silence while we're waiting for some sort of response from the U.S. and from Mercurial Trump in particular.
I just wanted we got to wrap this up because I want to get into the bail reform. Finally, just the conversation coming out of this cancellation of the negotiations, and people are saying, why would Doug Ford have gone and done $75 million for this ad campaign? The fact that people think that Doug Ford went and did this without the Carney government sign off is a bit, I would say, you're being a bit naive. But as
And
you say, well, there'll probably be a taco. We'll have a taco moment.
that's what I'm talking about. This back and forth. Trump loves this, right? Because again, Trump's main point is being the impresario to the Trump show. And one thing I'll point out, just this morning, there was a sit down interview of Doug Ford in La Presse, of all places. So, what does that suggest to you? Why is Doug Ford trying to talk to Quebecers?
Yes, this is sort of an integrated, coordinated plan of some kind. All right, let's go on. So let's talk about bail reform. Now, there is this growing sense in Canada that it is not as safe as it used to be. And the government introduced a new bill called Bill C-14. It's the Bail in Sentencing Reform Act. This was just tabled last week on October 23rd by the Justice Minister, Sean Fraser. Now, this is really targeting around the repeat violent offenders. They are breaking the law again while they're out on bail. And so this bill is supposed to make it harder for repeat violent offenders to get out on bail. They've got a bunch of different provisions that they're adding. It's a bit more legal jargon that think that you and I have expertise on. Examples of the violent offenses that, if you commit this, it's going to be harder to get would be violent auto theft, home invasions, human trafficking, assaults, extortion, as the examples. So this has been put out. Now, our business question of the day is, does this proposed legislation, is it actually addressing a real problem, or is this just spin? That there's more crime, there's more repeat offenders. Is that just the perception we're being fed because a lot of it's out on social, or is it actually more dangerous in Canada?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Well, let's start maybe with some very basic data. How is crime changing in Canada, and can we compare it to our neighbor in the South? So the answer to that question is generally yes. If we look at a particular violent crime, is up 9% for Canada, despite continuing to drop a little bit in the US. Now, it's important to also point out that our violent crime rate is a lot lower than in the US, depending on which city or which geography you're looking at. It's at least one third lower in terms of violent crimes.
But if you look at a more recent time frame, there is an uptick in violent crime and non-violent crime. So if you're only looking back in the last, let's say, 15 years or so, 10 to 15 years ago, then this has increased. So there is some truth to the matter that in more recent memory, we are seeing more violent crime. We're seeing more nonviolent crime overall. This is Stats Can data for people who are interested in from 2024. They have something called the Crime Severity Index. But they have said from in 2024 that these are decreasing for the first time in 4 years. So we might have hit the peak of that increase, and hopefully we are now beginning what will be a positive trend down.
That's correct. I think we're seeing probably a combination of some COVID related impacts as well as the fentanyl drug crisis.
Okay, so that's the reality of the situation. So there's truth in the matter that something needs to be done. But let's talk about this repeat offenders and bail. Now, Emmanuel, you have heard from someone who is an actual detective in a police force that they perceive this as a real problem. They see the rotating door, so to speak, of criminals going in and out of the system.
That's correct. And there's a frustration because they keep doing their work, their policing work, arresting those folks, but then seeing them back on the street, I'm certain can be incredibly frustrating when you're trying to do your job and it's like the work of Sisyphus and you keep pushing up that boulder and it just comes back down and you have to start all over again.
All right. Well, let's talk a bit about the reactions to this bill. Because, as an example, the Canadian Civil Liberties Association, they are opposed to elements of this bill. And one of the reasons why is they say that the data doesn't support the need to make these kinds of legislative changes. That they're saying there's a few high-profile examples, and this is what is fueling the sentiment. So that the Liberal government has put this legislation together out of more of politics than data.
Yeah, this is a good point that they make. Are you familiar, Laurel, with something called the broken window theory?
I'm not actually.
So this is, you know, speaking of the data that was going back 40, 50 years, this is a theory that was developed in particular around New York in the 80s and or 70s and 80s, which was by all definition of the term crime ridden. But then some guy came up with the idea that when you see graffiti and when you see broken windows, that generates the opportunity or maybe the permission for other people to also do graffiti and break windows, and therefore all kinds of crime would be encouraged because you're feeling that the area is not being taken care of. And so a lot of policing theory was developed around this concept. And I think it makes sense, right? And actually, there's a lot of research that supports this broken window theory as recent as 2018 and all over the world. This has been researched. But what I think a lot of the science around this also looks into is that while this is one of many aspects of crime fighting, there's a lot of other issues that also need to be dealt with. Just by using this broken window theory or just by using bail reform, you're going to address some of the points and some of the causes of crime, but you're not going to address all of them.
This tracks on two things it makes me think of. So in the stats can data that we were just talking about, they list out how some violent, nonviolent crimes have shifted. And there's one offense that has increased by 14%, and that is shoplifting of $5,000 or under. And I was like, well, why is that one going up? And I wonder if it's tied to all these social media posts that I've been seeing around these smash and grabs that are happening in shopping centers and Walmarts and the LCBOs. So you're seeing a lot of people just going in and grabbing stuff and running out the door and nobody does anything. So if you are someone who's interested or tempted to commit this crime and you see people doing it online and getting away with it, that, to your same point, well, if they can do it, then I can do it. So it might perpetuate this idea that this is the kind of crime that no one cares about and I can get away with.
So
So
we just had this big jewel theft in the Louvre in Paris
yeah,
this week. I wonder if that means suddenly we're going to get some rash of other high stakes capers all over the
quite possible.
museums.
Quite possible. So the other point that is what you raised, which I think is a good segue, is those that have come out with statements about this bill. So we talked about the Canadian Civil Liberties Association. We also should talk about the Canadian Bar Association. Now, the Canadian Bar Association has said the issue of repeat offenders is a real issue, but they're saying the legislation isn't actually the way to address it. And they say there's essentially layout, and they have a public letter they've put up, but there's kind of two categories. These repeat offenders fall into two categories. One of them are people who have mental health, they have addiction, they need social supports, they need mental health supports, they need physical health supports, and that changing the legislation and not addressing these other supports that are required isn't going to stop these repeat offenders.
That's the challenge, right? So I know when it comes to bail, one of the key issues in the system is that there are some mandates that if you do not push a case through within a certain time frame, then the judge just drops the charges. Now, if
Right.
we think about that, there's multiple friction points. So you need obviously enough judges to process all of these things. You need enough prosecutors to push the cases through. And then you need enough police support because they're the ones that are building the case, get the evidence, and arrest the person. So that means if you have failures at any of those 3 points because there's enough budget to properly move these cases through, then we end up releasing people or not even prosecuting them once they've been arrested. So I think this is definitely a good contributor that goes outside of just, whether or not the law is properly set up in terms of the bail conditions. So that's a key issue.
And this is absolutely highlighted by the Canadian Bar Association, the Canadian Civil Liberties Association. Also, there is one interesting point that the CBA mentioned, and that has to do with the people you really want to target, so the real violent repeat offenders, that the way that this bill is currently drafted, that there are going to be charter issues. So the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, because the way that the Charter of Rights and Freedoms is written, it doesn't matter what your previous history is, that everyone is presumed innocent. And so you hold people indefinitely or without bail if they are presumed innocent, because then you could be holding innocent people. So they expect that this won't hold up against the charter. So this looks like this bill is going to face some real challenges. Though, of course, there has been support coming out. Some police associations have been coming out in support, some not. Obviously, the conservatives, they have called this a half-baked copy and paste of their Jail Not Bail Act. And I want to put this up here right now because we are tracking these bail reform narratives. And actually, the conservative motion, this Jail Not Bail Act that was shot down by the Liberals in the House, this actually took up a fair amount of space in the conversation, that they're calling the Liberal bill a bit of just a repeat, or they're just copying what the conservatives are trying to do.
Right. So is it a good case of judo from the liberals? And are they really cutting the grass from under the feet of the conservatives here?
Yeah, it's quite possible. I mean, if they like what's in there, then why not? So I do want to, with this data, as you can see, though, this narrative around violence, which I separated from issues around immigration, separated about issues around home invasion, but it's really this violence and violent repeat offenders that people are very, very worried about. They are seeing it more often on social. They are seeing it more often in the news. It is real. They want something to be done. I think that personally think that this bill is easier to put forward, this legislation, than actually fix the problem.
So I I know you've done some research and you've built some data in terms of what's being talked about on social. Um, but I want to preface this that we live in an algorithmic world, right? If I search for luggage on Google, or heck, if I even pronounce the word luggage in front of my phone, it feels like suddenly I'm going to be served a whole bunch of luggage ads. And my social feed, whether it's Twitter, the volume of conversation has really spiked up over the last couple of months. Does that reflect what you see in the data and who and how people are talking about bail reform and crime on social?
Well, it looks like beginning in August that the bulk of the conversation, they're almost moving in parallel, is this violence and violent language and keywords that is moving in tandem with bail reform. So it is what is driving the conversation.
So that could explain why the liberal government decided to do a little judo move, and put this in front of the House of Commons for discussion, so that they are reacting to public sentiment and social public sentiment.
Absolutely, and 100%. And this is part of the attack or concerns that these groups that we talked about already have with the way this legislation came about. They think they're reacting to public sentiment, that they're reacting to social media sentiment instead of reacting to the actual data. But it's really this violence and violent repeat offenders that people are very, very worried about. They are seeing it more often on social. They are seeing it more often in the news. It is real. They want something to be done. I personally think that this bill is easier to put forward, this legislation, than actually fix the problem.
We live in an algorithmic world, right? If I search for luggage on Google, or heck, if I even pronounce the word luggage in front of my phone, it feels like suddenly I'm going to be served a whole bunch of luggage ads. And my social feed, whether it's Twitter, it's TikTok, or some of these others, is going to start showing me a whole bunch of luggage related video posts. So I'm curious, because I imagine the same thing happens if I look at, some security camera footage on TikTok of some sort of jewel theft that's happened in a mall near me. My suspicion is it's going to keep serving me the same kind of content. And it could certainly make me think that suddenly I'm surrounded by jewel theft, while in fact, Maybe there was just one over the last month, and then it happened to trigger historical videos to also pop up on my screen. So this is one concern that I've had because the algorithm is kind of transforming how we see reality.
Now, we did dig a little deeper to say, okay, well, who's driving? Who's behind this? Can we see a little bit more? So I'm going to show now it's really being powered by the smaller voices. This is, yes, there are large, kind of calling here mega influencers, macro influencers, and micro influencers. They are out there pushing this narrative, but the volume, the most of this is coming out of smaller accounts. But the question is, are they real people? Or, as we've talked about in other episodes, is this real or someone seeding or groups trying to seed this concept or idea that life is more violent in Canada?
That's always a good question. We know that on average, 25% of the content on social media is bot driven. There's an interesting article this morning from 404 Media that shows that even relatively good reputation companies are now investing in trying to move social media artificially. And that's kind of scary because that is a publicly funded company that is specifically trying to impact what people think.
Yes, I read that article. Now, they say they don't get into politics. Looks like they're focusing more on consumer or beauty or lifestyle, but the technology exists to do it in politics. And you
If it
absolutely.
exists, people will use it, right?
Yes, and I do know people who've done political campaigns who've told me they said, "Oh yeah, no, we looked into how we could hire a bot farm to push the narrative on this, that, or the other." So it absolutely is happening by people who want Canadians to think a certain way, which is why we have this podcast, right? We're here to lift the veil on the data of what how Canadians are being influenced by what they're seeing on social media. So what's your so what on this?
Well, the so what is we've got to be careful of the narrative. The algorithm is always throwing data or rather throwing content at us, and it can make us feel a certain way. But we've got to be very careful. Is this first real content or is it the bots? And then second, is this just amplifying something that I happen to look at on my screen and I waited just a few seconds to watch it through and now suddenly it's throwing me more of this content in a way that's disproportionate with the reality. This is a big challenge that we need to understand as a society and as individuals. We got to be conscious whenever you're getting angry or you're getting influenced by social media.
Yeah, I mean, when I read particularly the Canadian Bar Association's letter and what they had to say, it gave me a lot of pause on, is this the right legislation? I'm sure there are legislative tweaks that need to happen, but it does appear like this is the easier way to say we've done something than to actually do something. And I'm not as concerned about the Civil Liberties Association as much as I am the Canadian Bar Association. But obviously, the idea that you could have innocent people who are getting caught up in this, there is a possibility for a charter challenge. So, yes, have some legislative changes, but this needs to be coupled and linked to other reforms within the system. Both groups talk about the lack of efficiency. That's what you raised as well. It seems like they're trying to just throw something over the wall to say that they've done something. So it feels a bit like lazy policymaking to me.
And there's going to be impacts, right? So right out there, let's assume, it all goes through and it's legally solid. That means suddenly we're going to need to, I don't know, double, triple jail capacity because these cases take 1, 2, 3 years to go through the system. So if you're suddenly doubling or tripling the number of people that are in jail while they're awaiting judgment, well, that means we need to invest in a lot of facilities and a lot of people to be the prison guards and all the infrastructure that goes around there, feeding them, taking care of them, the healthcare, and building the prisons and jails to do this. So this is not gonna this is gonna have some repercussions that go beyond just changing the conditions for bail.
Agreed. I think they should probably go back to the drawing board on this one. But anyway, that is what we have for today on bail reform. It looks like this one's going to end up being a bit of a stinker for the Carney government. But if you like what we're doing, if you have not already, please like, share, follow us. We are on YouTube. We, of course, are on all of the podcast apps. As always, Emmanuel, it's always fun to dig into these issues with you. And for everyone listening, thanks for joining us and see you next time.
Until next.